Good evening. Welcome to tonight's iStream event, Saving Your Home Through Bankruptcy. The biggest part of this, of course, is about the foreclosure and stopping a foreclosure. But before we get into that, I just want to get into the relevance of what we're talking about. There's over 14 million homes that are being foreclosed right now in the United States. And there's a lot of homes that are pre-foreclosure, meaning waiting for the government or the mortgage company to start the process of foreclosing. So it's a pretty relevant topic, and I know there's a lot of you out there that are very concerned about their homes, behind a few payments, want to know what's going to happen, or you're actually in the middle of the foreclosure, but you're not quite sure how bankruptcy is going to help you. So the first thing we want to go through is I'm going to explain a little about the foreclosure process. Then I'm going to talk a little more about the loan modification process, how that interacts with the foreclosure and the bankruptcy process if you go there. And then in the end, that's when we're really going to get to the meat about how the bankruptcy can help you and what it can do. Because each one of them has a different function, and there are ways to get out of the foreclosure process even before you get to the bankruptcy. And I'd like you to know those so that you can take whatever opportunities you have to save your home. So the first thing we want to talk about is what generally happens in the foreclosure process. Foreclosure process basically is the legal process of taking the title back through, in the case in Virginia, through a trustee sale. Now there are two ways to do a foreclosure. There's a judicial sale state, where basically in some states they go through the court process to foreclose on a property. Virginia is a trustee jurisdiction. So basically, as part of your deed of trust, when you take out a mortgage, in the terms of the mortgage, there's a trustee that's assigned, and that trustee has certain powers under Virginia law to begin to foreclose if you follow certain steps once you've defaulted. So let's go over the general rules. Now, I'm not going to get really specific into the legal, definite parameters of foreclosing in Virginia, because they can be quite specific, and there are so many of them. I'm going to give you the general rule, because a lot of these mortgage companies, especially the nationwide ones, function on a timeline that fits all jurisdictions. So it's not necessarily a timeline that's specifically geared to Virginia law and what's required. The first thing is that the general rule is that once you fall behind at least 3 payments, so basically you're moving towards that third payment, you're going to be put into the internal loan modification, loss mitigation department of the mortgage company. So you can be 1 payment behind the rest of your life, pay that late charge for missing that payment, and the mortgage company will do nothing. You hit the second payment being missed, the mortgage company is going to get a little more concerned, but it's the third payment where they're going to stick you into their internal loss mitigation department. And you'll be getting much more contact from them at that point with regards to what do you want to do, can you pay them up, the pressure calls that some of you maybe experience. When you hit that 4th payment, then you're into their foreclosure department. Now, this is just a general rule at how that works nationwide. Technically, under Virginia law, they can move a lot quicker, but a lot of these mortgage companies won't push the issue too quickly, because they do want you to try to catch up. They do want not to put the loan in default. However, should you hit that 4th payment, you're going to certainly find that you're on their list for foreclosure. Once you're in the foreclosure department, what happens then is that the loan is sent out to a local attorney or foreclosure trustee company. They don't have to be attorneys, but most of them are. And you will receive a notice. That notice will basically have many state requirements telling you that you have a certain amount of time to dispute the loan or the balance. And if you don't respond, then they're going to proceed with the foreclosure. That generally gives you about another 30 days once the attorney receives it. And then after that, they start the foreclosure process. And generally in Virginia, as part of that, there's a sales notification requirement. They they advertise your sale in a newspaper. Locally, those newspapers are generally Virginia Pilot, the Daily Press, and the Inside Business, which is a production of the Virginia Pilot. So they notice the sale in there for at least 2 times in a certain period under Virginia law. And once that notice is done and you've been properly notified via the mail, technically they can execute the foreclosure sale. It's a little more complicated than that, but the timeline is what I want people to understand. You're talking about 90 days into the loss mitigation department, 4th month out to the attorney more than likely, and then anywhere from 60 days to maybe 75 days before you have a foreclosure sale date. That's a general rule. Remember, it can go faster under Virginia law, but that's the general rule for nationwide processing. The problem that you have during that timeline is, how do you stop it? How do you get out of the cycle? Because once you hit the attorney's office, you're going to be looking at paying the attorney's fees. They send people out to make sure that the property is not abandoned. They charge you an inspection fee. So the costs start going up once you've been turned over to foreclosure. The only, short of paying up, there are two ways to do it. One is, if you're lucky enough and you have a mortgage company that has programs and works with you, there are possibilities of getting temporary hardship deferments. If you're out of work, basically sometimes they will allow you to miss a certain amount of payments, knowing that you've proven to them that at a certain time you'll be able to resume. That deferment is very difficult to get, but I've seen it happen, and it's one thing you could explore. Second option is a loan modification. The problem with the loan modification is that there are so many loans being modified these days because they're either bad loans, the person's so far behind they can't catch up. There's a multitude of reasons, but there's so many modifications going on right now that the bottom line is that the timeline to process the loan modification can be excessive. It can reach up to 4 months. And if you're down to a few weeks or days before foreclosure sale and you're asking for a loan modification, you can't rely on them halting the sale. If you get in that situation, the only way you should do anything other than contact an attorney is if you get in writing that they are going to stop the sale, or they have confirmed with you in a way that you can prove, should they renege on it, you've confirmed that they basically they're not going to go forward with the sale. So the loan modification is a great tool, and it's a great value. It's a much greater value than what bankruptcy can do for you, because in the loan modification they're doing a couple things that bankruptcy can't do for you. They're taking what you're behind, presumably, and they're putting it at the back of the loan so that you're resuming a payment, hopefully a lower payment if they've adjusted either the terms, the interest, or any part of the loan to allow the payment to be more affordable. So you don't have to worry about catching up. You can start with a lower payment, and you're off and running, and the stress of losing your house is gone. However, a lot of people are getting denied. They're getting denied multiple times when they're submitting loan modifications. So if you get into that situation and you've got this foreclosure coming down the pike at you, one of the few ways to basically stop it is a bankruptcy. In 1 minute we're going to get into the details of what type of bankruptcy and how it can be used. I want to get a little more into dealing with people's expectation of loan modifications, because loan modifications have become so common in our language and in the news these days that I've noticed there's been an increased expectation that a person should get a loan modification. To have your loan modified, technically, you've got to meet a couple of conditions. First one is you either got to have a sympathetic mortgage company that under their own powers are going to modify that loan for you. No requirement, doesn't matter, we're going to modify the loan for whatever reason. Second option is that you qualify under a government program. HUD, the Making Home Affordable programs, all have a multitude of modification options, but you have to qualify under them. So you need to explore to see if you qualify under those options. Under those options, the government, because it's a government-backed loan, the lender is put under more pressure to basically work with you to do a modification. So it's not just, if you cannot get the lender to do a loan modification, go on the government website, go to the HUD website, start investigating whether you can qualify under those government programs, so that they will basically put a little pressure on your behalf to get the mortgage company to expedite a modification for you. The other expectation that I really need to discuss with you is this expectation of what possible modifications are out there. Because a lot of people think, oh, if they modify the loan, I'm so far behind, I've lost my income, they'll modify the loan to make it affordable to me. That's the first expectation that you've got to get away from. The modification is not based on on making it affordable to you. It's a simple math formula. There are three things that basically go into it. One is, what's the principal balance of your loan? Because you've got to take that and put it into a mortgage calculation, and then the next two are going to tell you how that modification is going to come out. The next one is interest rate. What's that interest rate going to be on the modification? Right now they're dropping those interest rates down to 3 to 4%. So if you take your loan balance and you put in maybe a really optimistic interest rate of 3.5%, then the final element that you're going to be looking at or variable is the term. Is it going, are we talking a 30-year term, or are we talking about a 40-year term? Yes, some of these mortgage companies are actually stretching the loans out to 40 years. So your best case scenario, 40 years, 3.5% on the balance that you owe. Whatever that number is, don't forget to add your taxes and your insurance to get a payment, your best case scenario, your absolutely best case scenario for the payment. If that payment is not affordable to you, then you know that a loan modification is not going to help you. You've lost so much income that that house has become too expensive for you, and it's not possible to reduce the mortgage payment to an amount that's affordable to you. Are there other possibilities? There are principal reduction plans that are starting to come around, but it varies on so many elements, and I certainly wouldn't tell you to expect it to happen. But remember this about what I'm saying about the math. You've got to project what you think the best case scenario is. If that best case scenario is in your parameters of affordability, then you might have a chance. But if it's way out of it, it's too expensive for you, then you know you've got a cash flow problem, and a modification is not going to help you. So basically, we've talked a little about the foreclosure process. We've talked a little about the loan modification process. The next thing is, okay, coming into a bankruptcy, what will a bankruptcy do for you? Well, the bottom line is that there are two types of bankruptcy. Chapter 7 wipes out unsecured debt. It really doesn't help you with the house. And a Chapter 13 repayment plan, which reorganizes the debt over a 3 to 5 year repayment period. The debt we're talking about is the amount you're behind on the house. That would be what we call the arrears, the missed mortgage payments. So we could take the missed mortgage payments in a Chapter 13 and we can spread them out over a 60-month period to help you catch up. You would resume the regular mortgage payment the month after you file, and then you would have a separate payment going through the bankruptcy court over the 60 months to help you get caught back up on the mortgage balance. Several things going on. Number one, even if you can't afford the best case scenario, or even if a modification has not been approved but you've been in the process and they are still moving forward with a foreclosure, it sometimes works for many people to file a Chapter 7, which will stop the foreclosure, and then basically it will buy them time to get through the modification process again. So instead of putting them directly into a Chapter 13 where they're going to be stuck with paying the regular mortgage payment plus the catch-up amount, which makes it too expensive for them, they buy the time by getting rid of some other debt that they can't afford to pay, and they want to get off the table so they can divert the income towards the mortgage payment by doing the Chapter 7. Immediately once they get into the Chapter 7, they're on the phone, they're doing the modification. During the Chapter 7 process, you have 90 days where the bankruptcy protection's in place, and even with the mortgage company asking to get the house out of the bankruptcy, it would take them much more than 90 days to get back into a foreclosure position. So it can buy them time, it can wipe out other debt that is sucking off income, which will allow them to better afford the mortgage payment, and it gives them the time to possibly get a modification. Remember, a modification is always going to trump a bankruptcy because the modification takes what you're behind, puts it on the end of the loan, and immediately you just start resuming the regular, assumedly affordable loan payment. Chapter 13 is a little more different. If it's not possible to get a loan modification, and many of you have mortgage companies that have rejected your attempts 3 or 4 times. They're just not working with you. There's another type of loan that is particularly at risk of not being able to get modified, and that's one of these mortgage-backed security loans that's just been packaged up with a bunch of other mortgage securities, and there is a servicing agent that basically accepts the payment, but they don't really have the authorization to modify the loan. So you can call them night and day, but you ultimately end up just getting rejected. Those loans are very difficult to modify. In which case a Chapter 13 to catch up on what you're behind might be the only option. So those are a couple of things to consider when you're talking about whether a bankruptcy will help you. The biggest thing I wanted to kind of talk to you about is what are some of the other advantages of a Chapter 13. There's a couple other advantages. If you go directly into a 13, you can take what you're behind and catch up on it. You can also wipe out any credit card debt at the same time. You can also restructure your secured debt. Let's say you have a very high car payment, which is taking a lot of money off the table, which would better help you to afford catching up through the court payment and catching up on the mortgage payment. That can be restructured. And there's one other very, very, very powerful tool that the 13 provides, and that's stripping off an unsecured second mortgage. If your house is so underwater that you do not, the value of the house is less than the first mortgage payment, then a second mortgage can be removed through the process of a Chapter 13 bankruptcy. The problem is you're going to need to get an appraisal to prove the value of that house, and you're going to have to go through that 3 to 5 year repayment plan. So even if you could get a modification, even if you could do a 7 and wipe out the debt and afford to catch up on the house and go forward, sometimes going into a 13, especially when the circumstances are right, to get off a 35, a 50, however large that second mortgage payment, it makes it worthwhile to go through a Chapter 13 reorganization, because that's a considerable savings. Often those second mortgages are either 15 to 30 years. The amount you're paying is going to be, 2, 3, 4 times the total balance that you owe over the life of the loan. So the savings is much more than the principal balance that you're looking at. So if you end up talking to an attorney because you're not able to adjust the loan, make sure that he explores that option to get rid of any second or even third mortgages if your house is underwater. There's a couple of important signs that you should keep in mind with regards to figuring out whether you really need to do a bankruptcy. The first sign is you get turned down for the loan modification repeatedly. If you've been turned down repeatedly, there is a sign. There's a couple of signs that, a couple of reasons that you might be turned down repeatedly. Number one, your income just might not qualify you. Going back to explaining whether you can afford a modification payment, the other side to that whole discussion is really how much income do you have coming in? You've got to realistically look at that, because if you're asking them to modify your loan and you've lost half your household income, half from the time when you qualified for the loan, what they're seeing is that bottom line is you're not going to be able to afford that new mortgage payment regardless, because your income has dropped so much. That reality is going to be very plain to them. So regardless of your hope that they're going to modify the loan, the chances are they're seeing your lack of affordability. You cannot afford that loan. The other issue is, another reason why they might want to not modify your loan and move forward with the foreclosure, is there's equity in the house. Now this is sad to say, but the bottom line is that those mortgage lenders, they want to get paid. They want to get their non-performing loans off the books and get as much out of it. So if you have some equity in it that would ensure them to get paid in full, you have a greater risk that a loan modification may not be approved. That's, like I said, that's unfortunate, because you're trying to save your home and your equity, but at the same time they're looking at what's best for them profitability-wise. The third thing is that, once again, the numbers, regardless of how the numbers work out, in the end, even in a modified loan circumstance, the mortgage company's got to make a profit. So they make the profit either by extending the loan, so they're making more interest off over a longer period of time, or they make the profit by foreclosing on your house and getting the money back right now so that they can reinvest it somewhere else. So there are a lot of things that are working against you that you may not understand in the modification process. The other thing is that sorry, I'm just going to look at my notes here. If your credit's so bad, when you're filing for that modification, if your credit is so bad that you have judgments, a lot of unsecured debt out there, that's affecting their modification consideration. Meaning that they're looking at the fact that maybe you can afford that loan, but you haven't taken care of this unsecured debt over here. And that debt could come back either to garnish you, levy you, or put a lien on the property. It has a huge impact on what their decision is going to be, because once again they're trying to protect their value, which is not to have your wages garnished after they've already said, look, you're behind this much and we're going to let you fall a little further behind, or we're going to accept less, and then they take the loss a year down the road. I wasn't 100% clear. My explanation should have been that, they're going to decide, should we foreclose on you now to minimize our loss or take the risk on modifying that you might end up defaulting in a year. And there's a lot of things that can happen in a year. Number one, the principal balance goes up, so they lose more. And number two, damage could happen to the property. So they're really trying to look at all aspects of how to protect themselves, not necessarily just how to protect you. So when you're thinking about a loan modification, just be aware it's not all about making that house affordable to you. It really is a balancing act. But once again, I would tell you that the bankruptcy really only can help you in a couple of situations over a loan modification. The first one is if you're going to strip a very large second mortgage. Second one is where you have other debt that unless you get it off the table, you are not going to be able to qualify for that loan modification. And that goes into a situation where maybe we would do a 7, wipe out that other debt, and therefore you'll look better for the mortgage company to do the modification because they know that there's no garnishments, levies, or liens pending. Third situation is where they're just not going to work with you. They're going to force you into a bankruptcy to stop that sale. Now, I've had plenty of bankruptcy clients come in and file for bankruptcy, even knowing that they couldn't afford the house or the modification. And there's two reasons that's a good option for them. The first reason is that they have other debt. They've got to get rid of it. The bankruptcy will also wipe out what's owed on the house. The other factor in their decision generally is the factor that it buys time for them. When a foreclosure sale goes through, not stopped, but actually is completed, you're only going to have anywhere from 30 to 60 days, depending on what you can negotiate with the new owner or the bank or whoever takes over the house to move. And for a lot of people, that's just not enough time. So one of the things that the bankruptcy does is it provides them the value of getting rid of all the excess debt. It wipes out their ownership, their obligation on the mortgage, and it buys them time to move on or get a modification. So a lot of things can happen, with time, including miracles such as winning the lottery. But time is a huge value for people that are trying to stay in the house long enough to see if there's other options to get through. So this has been kind of a general layout of the bankruptcy process and what it will do for you in a foreclosure situation. I'm not going to go into too much depth tonight because it basically it can get very complicated. So many variables that go on. Just remember that if you do not get a modification and you're repeatedly denied, it's probably the time to call an attorney. If you get a foreclosure sale notice and they're still talking modification, it's probably time to call the attorney. If you've got a foreclosure sale notice and they haven't been talking to you, period, it's absolutely the time to call the attorney. So this is John Merna from the Merna Law Group, and I appreciate you joining us tonight for saving your home through bankruptcy. And we look forward to talking with you next week, or absolutely in 2 weeks actually, on our next live streaming event.